Only a few nautic miles from the United States, there is a country where time seems to have stopped since Fidel Castro and his revolutionaries took over more than 50 years ago. The island is often referred to as the Pearl of the Caribbean, mostly for its natural beauty, but also for the music and the zest for life its inhabitants have supposedly maintained over the years, despite all deprivations. We look forward to this crumbling bulwark of socialism, to Cuba, a land in transition. Of course, we also want to relax.
Bailemos sin música, al son de los sueños, tu mano en mi cuello y en tu cintura yo, al ritmo de besos pulsando las cuerdas de nuestros latidos, tu corazón y el mío, abrazada fuerte, me perdí en tu vida y olvidé el momento de la despedida.
After a 10-hour direct flight from Frankfurt, we finally arrive at the airport Frank Pays of Holguin, Cuba's third biggest town in the eastern part of the country. Outside the building it becomes clear that we are in a different world. The ubiquitous old-timers catch your eye, a legacy of the expelled US Americans. The Cubans simply kept the cars, new ones have practically not been built. And so the historical Fords, Chevys and Buicks still characterize Cuba's image. Some of them are used as taxis. We wish to enjoy such a nostalgic ride, but more on that later. Now a bus takes us to our hotel. We are going through a breathtakingly beautiful scenery, green as far as you can see, plus a rustic idyll that brings a new shine to the stressed European eye. What seems so picturesque to us, horse and ox-drawn carts and carriages, are the only transportation for many here. Only few Cubans own a motor-driven vehicle. We finally get to our hotel, a parallel universe set up right at the waterfront offside Cuban life. Here the paying customer shall not miss a thing. Here he is fed, the food is abundant and delicious. The rooms too give you no cause for complaints. Well, yes, the recently extended complex has got the charm of barracks and could use some gardening, but there is no rush in Cuba. Hectic is a word which is unknown. The staff is always very friendly. A Cuban guide on a later trip will list 3 reasons for that, namely tips, tips and tips. A peso convertible so-called cook quickly drops onto the counter of the bar. That is roughly $1, a day's wage to a Cuban worker. Barkeeper and waiter jobs are therefore very much wanted. Once you have one, you won't leave it again. Of course there is nightly entertainment at this location too, but you can't fail to notice that the standard of the performances is a lot higher than what you may know from many European hotels. Whether it's a cappella, dance groups or water ballet, it all seems very professional and gives you a clue of how much time, energy and passion the artists put into rehearsals. No, it's not always Cuban that is shown here, but it brings delight to the audience, especially when the guests may be part of what's going on stage. Of course, we had also come for Cuba's famous beaches. The fine white sand and the turquoise water exert a fascination that you can hardly escape. And so we arm ourselves with a diving mask and snorkel in order to explore what is going on beneath the surface. Again, Cuba keeps its promise. We immediately spot schools of fish that don't play hard to get as we offer them some bread. Mullets, smallmouth grunt snappers, and of course the Sergeant Major, fish that you can find anywhere in the Caribbean. Although we're not exactly in the Caribbean, as we went to the Atlantic side of Cuba. The locals' assurance that there was no need for fear of sharks in the waters around Guardalavaca is something we find confirmed. Although we try very hard, we do not spot a single one. Out in the open waters, yes, there might be some, says one, but they'd never come close to the beaches. The next day, this time we do not get into but onto the water. A small catamaran takes us a few hundred yards out to the sea. It is steered by Kevin Costner. No, it's not really him, but his resemblance with a film star is something that people often mention, says the Cuban skipper. He didn't like his job too much, he tells us. Being in the sun all day long was very exhausting, plus the salty air was harmful to the skin. Our compassion has its limits. As we get back to the beach, I grab a kayak and paddle out again. It'll be almost 2 hours before I come back. The consequences of this rashness I have to bear the next day in the shape of a sunstroke. A bit offside the official beach, we meet Julio, a man in his late 30s with rotten clothes and teeth. He's a gardener with a hotel, he tells us. Before the late shift he'd always come here to try and catch some fish. When I ask him whether he's happy, his eyes darken. How he could possibly be happy, he asks, as he could hardly feed his family. For a kilo of fish he'd have to work a whole day, even 3 days, for a base cap. And another encounter at the waterfront. Towards dawn, an old man in rubber boots casts a net right at the beach. Only small fish get entangled today. On other days he's luckier, he says. Then he takes another try. He won't make a fortune this time. Dinner, however, should be safe. We get on a boat that will take us to one of the biggest and probably most money-making tourist attractions in the region, a dolphinarium set up in a cove. Tourists willing to pay may get in touch with the friendly mammals of the sea. The animals do not enjoy freedom, that's right, but we have the impression that they cope well with their situation. Right on our arrival, they come close and make eye contact. It almost seems that they can hardly wait to welcome the two-legged beings in their home. After brief instructions, the fun can start. The guests are allowed into the water, and the dolphins willingly present themselves to them. The tourists are explicitly encouraged to touch them. There is cuddling, stroking, patting, and a lot of kissing. dolphins always listen to the commands from their trainers for a good reason. As anywhere in Cuba's tourism, the driving force also here is the tip, this time, however, in the shape of little pieces of fish. So-called animal rights activists may roll their eyes in view of these images, but once you get into direct contact with these creatures, you will understand why dolphins are often used for therapeutic purposes. After the experience, they serve as lunch. We may choose from 2 different meals and pick the crayfish. The food is included in the price of the trip. The next tip busters are already waiting. It's a band of musicians that have positioned themselves at the tables, ready to take requests from the guests. And so we can once more listen to Chan Chan and Guantanamera, as these songs are known by almost everybody. Of course, these Cubans too want their slice of the pie, but there can be no doubt that their love for music is real. After lunch, when I talk to one of the musicians about his guitar, he immediately grabs the instrument and starts to play. After a few bars, his colleagues come running from various corners of the premises and join in. And so the spontaneous session rounds off our visit. Of course, that too deserved a tip.